Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 2nd October 2020, and these are the issues that we'll be discussing today. The first article for the day is taken from The Hindu and it is titled Constraining Critique. So let me give a brief background of this issue. So on 23rd February 2020, in the backdrop of the riots that broke out in northeast Delhi between the people who were protesting the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 and the people who were supporting this act. So, in this context, Amnesty International, which is a international non-governmental organization which started in 1961 in London, has sought an independent investigation into all allegations of human rights violations by the police during these riots. So, what actually Amnesty International does is it seeks to publicize violations by governments and other entities of rights recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. So, it focuses especially on the freedom of speech and of conscience and the right against torture. So, these are very much controversial issues in the present regime, and there have been a lot of editorials with respect to freedom of speech, and also at the same time torture convention was again in the news. So in both of these issues, Amnesty International has a very active role. So in 1977 it was even awarded a Nobel Prize for Peace. So Amnesty International is a part of this global organization, a human rights movement which was spearheaded by Amnesty International, and it has a registered office in Bangalore in India. This is the background of this organization. So on 10th September, the government has decided to freeze the bank accounts of Amnesty International India's branch. The government has alleged that Amnesty International has been defying the rule of law, that is, they are committing FCRA violations. In order to circumvent the Foreign Contribution Act 2010, Amnesty International UK remitted large amounts of money to 4 entities registered in India by classifying it as FDI. That is the main allegation made by the government. Now, in order to understand the significance of this allegation, let me give a brief background about the new rules for NGOs under the FCRA amendment that came out in 2020. So the Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Bill 2020 was passed in the Parliament and amended the FCRA Act of 2010. So the first rule that we will be talking about is, in order to receive foreign funds, an NGO has to register with the Ministry of Home Affairs, and they will get a FCRA registration number, and this should be renewed every 5 years. Secondly, they will have to get a bank account. This FCRA marked bank account will be with a designated branch of SBI in New Delhi. So the third one is there should be some cap on administrative expenses, and it has been lowered from 50% of the foreign funds received to 20% only. So there is an allegation by the government that a lot of NGOs, citing administrative expenses, are illegally routing money into the organizations and using it for illegal purposes. So that is the reason and rationale for this cap on administrative expenses at 20% of the foreign funds. The next thing is it prohibits the transfer of foreign grants received by an entity to a partner organization or an associated person with the organization. This is a general practice. Say in this case, for example, if Amnesty International UK's branch has certain funds and it wants to reroute those funds to the Indian branch, they cannot do it now. So this is the problematic issue that was raised by a lot of NGOs, because this will impact their functioning and they see it as a mechanism to suppress dissent in our country. However, India has been defending this move, or the government has been defending this move as a move that will enhance transparency and accountability, because there have been a lot of issues which might threaten the sovereignty of this country in the name of NGOs. So, in order to safeguard that national interests, the government has taken this step. In this context, Amnesty International has alleged that the government's insistence on transparency in NGO sector is reflecting the double standards of the government. Civil society is regulated by the Charity Commissioner, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Income Tax, and as well as donors who would be willing to spend their time on the websites after the donations are made, and they seek accountability from the NGOs. There is complete opacity with initiatives like PM Cares. Now, if same transparency and accountability are to be maintained, why is the government not coming up with data on how PM Care funds were utilized? That is the questions being raised by several newspaper articles and activists. Similarly, there has been a lot of controversy about electoral bonds. There is an allegation that the government has been using its power to grab as much as a share of these electoral bonds to ensure that they get the maximum amount of money. So there is also some opacity with respect to these funds, PM Cares and electoral bonds. So the activists who demanded that accountability and transparency should apply not just to the NGOs but also to these funds as well. So the bottom line that we're talking about here is NGOs should become partners in development, and if the government wants to regulate their activities, they certainly can, but dissent in a democracy is like a safety wall. And if a criticism comes up against the functioning of the government, it is the duty of the government to come up with an explanation and work with the civil society body to address the needs of the society rather than suppressing dissent. And for all this, RTI becomes a very important tool, and empowering people with RTI and also NGOs with RTI should be the way forward. Having a clear-cut definition of public authority in this aspect really helps. That should be the first step to take this issue forward. That is the gist of this article. The second article for the day, titled Undying Embers, is taken from the Hindu, and it is in the context of the Hathras rape case. Let me explain the background for this gruesome incident. A young woman, only 19 years old, hailing from the Valmiki community, she was brutally raped, and later she was denied the right to have a decent burial because the police have locked up the parents and they denied them the body of their daughter. So they have forcibly burned the body, and in this way we can say that she has not been given the constitutional right of equality before law and equal protection of law in both life and death. So the sequence of events that we have seen has been a horrifying moment for the entire country, and this gives us an opportunity to talk about the need for gender sensitivity in our society. The reason why we have to talk about gender sensitivity is because of the kind of crime that has been perpetuated. So the girl was allegedly murdered, assaulted when she was doing her daily activities. Her spinal cord was fractured, her tongue was cut down, and this inhuman activity which happened after a lot of sexual violence cases have popped up in the news shows us that the steps taken by the government are simply not a deterrent big enough to cause any disturbance in the minds of the perpetrators of these kind of crimes. So we need to look about how we can implement the J.S. Verma committee recommendations in the backdrop of the 2012 Nirbhaya case. So there are a lot of layers to this crime that has been committed. The first one is the gender aspect. The second one is the caste aspect. All these are social concepts and social constructs which have created an atmosphere where a certain segment of the society has taken it for granted that they can get away with crimes committed against the weaker gender or the lower caste. Even recently, the Crime in India report said that the atrocities committed against the SCs and STs have risen in Uttar Pradesh, and caste tension becomes one of the major factor for politics on the ground. So there is this inevitable cycle of humiliation, violence, and inequalities that are exhibited in the statistics of the Crime in India report. So we need to sensitize people with respect to both these constructs. One is gender and the other one is caste. How do we do this? To start with, family is the first agent of socialization. So the parents have a responsibility in proper upbringing of the male child. This is the first step that we have to move towards. Boys and girls should be raised right in an atmosphere of freedom and culture of mutual respect. This should start from the families itself. And it is important to enact and enforce legislations and implement policies that promote gender equalities. So even in the past, when we are talking about the Hyderabad gang rape case, there was a focus on what can be done and what is lacking currently, and constant efforts to measure the outcomes. But after a few days, after the media coverage has ended, the outrage on social media has not converted into something meaningful or something that can be termed as a meaningful change because of lack of a comprehensive and systemic research and analysis. So any preliminary research and analysis into the kind of behavior exhibited by this perpetrators of crime, one of the major reason is the patriarchal mindset. Even though a lot of urban youth have transformed with respect to the kind of patriarchal mindset that they were brought up in, the patriarchal mindset in rural India still persists. For every rape reported, there are so many unreported and unrecorded crimes. And because of this patriarchal mindsets where they treat the honor of women, which is as more important than the reporting of the crime itself, a lot of men are more likely to perpetuate violence because they know they will get away with it. So education, history of child maltreatment, exposure to domestic violence, all this combined together and ensure that the culture of violence is a norm in these societies. So if we take into consideration the National Family Health Survey 4, it revealed that every third married woman experienced physical or sexual abuse, and only 1.5% of them reported this crime. This is because, again, there is a phenomenon of secondary victimization. What is a secondary victimization? Whenever a victim approaches the police station, there have been a lot of cases where the police themselves victimize the victim and say that the person is responsible for the crime committed. So this leads to secondary victimization, and a fear psychosis is generated that it is better not to approach a police station. So in this way, the entire culture of violence against women has been perpetuated mainly because of the social constructs that we have. Now, in order to change this entire social construct, we need to resort to behavioral change. For that to happen, the institutions like police departments and judiciary must take the responsibility apart from the government. So these initiatives should ensure that confidence building measures are taken up amongst the public, and public feel comfortable to approach these institutions with a element of trust. Otherwise, these sort of crimes will keep on continuing, and another Justice Verma committee might come out, but things on the ground will not change. That is the gist of this article.